Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Congressman Mike Levin. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany. Good to be with you.
It is good to be with you, and our conversation comes a week after the House voted on what President Trump has described as his big, beautiful bill. It passed in a narrow vote in the House. No Democrat voted for it, including yourself. It's over 1,000 pages, and it is the signature of President Trump's second term, as it would enact his hallmark tax and immigration policies. So to start off the conversation, can you please explain your no vote?
Well, it was big, but it was not beautiful. This bill was reckless and cruel in a lot of different ways, and frankly, Brittany, just irresponsible. I think as good a place as any to start is what it would do to our national debt, which is currently 36 trillion and going up. This bill would add between 4 and 5 trillion to the debt. It's very concerning to me since we already pay more in interest on the debt, over $1 trillion a year, than we pay for the entire defense budget. I have young kids, and I want to make sure that future generations can live in a country that's strong economically, and that means we can't be buried in unending debt. And look, if the increase in debt were going to some great national project, in other words, if the administration and the Congress said, we're going to cure cancer, or we're going to have some other great national undertaking, that would be one thing. But this bill drives trillions of dollars to the debt and the deficit, really to pay for tax cuts for the very wealthiest Americans. In this bill, if you make over $4.3 million per year, your tax bill will go down by around $390,000 on average. But if you make less than $51,000 per year, your bill will go up on average by $700. The other thing I'll mention is cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and SNAP, also known sometimes as food stamps. But starting with healthcare, the bill will cut roughly 14 million people off of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And because it adds that extraordinary amount that I just mentioned to the debt, that will cause sequestration, which will result in a mandatory cut to Medicare. Now, I can tell you my 80-year-old mom was not very happy when she heard that this bill would result potentially in poorer quality of care, poorer ability to use Medicare in different places for different services, about $500 billion in mandatory cuts to Medicare over a decade. And then for food assistance, millions and millions of Americans, the most vulnerable, including many children who rely on nutrition assistance for healthy and nutritious meals, they're going to be cut out as well. There are other things I could focus on, Brittany, but I'll stop there. It is a very cruel and reckless bill in my view.
Cruel, reckless, and irresponsible is how you're describing this. So I do want to talk about a part that you would probably call the irresponsible part, and that's raising the national debt by trillions of dollars. The CBO, which is nonpartisan, said that they could see the national debt being raised by $3.8 trillion. And lawmakers who have described themselves as deficit hawks, Republicans, hardline Republicans, some of them voted for this bill, and Republicans have long said that they were the party that is focused on bringing down the national debt. When you've had conversations with your Republican colleagues on, hey, this is going to raise the national debt and not by a little bit in the trillions, what was their answer?
The answers were not good. I had one colleague, and again, I have many friends across the aisle. I think, they're stuck right now. They know that this is irresponsible. But one of them told me, well, we'll just grow our way out. And in other words, the growth that would come from the bill would pay for itself over time, would pay for those tax cuts over time. The problem is that just doesn't work, and it hasn't worked for decades. It didn't work under Ronald Reagan. It didn't work under George W. Bush. It didn't work under Donald Trump when he was president before, and it's not going to work this time. When in 2017, the original Trump tax cuts were put in place, at the time, Paul Ryan and House and Senate Republicans said that those tax cuts would pay for themselves, but they added around $1.7 trillion to our debt. And this time it's, as you said, estimated around $3.8 trillion. And I think that number is actually higher because if you look at a couple of the signature policy proposals in the bill that President Trump ran on last year, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime specifically, those are set to expire in this bill as currently drafted at the end of Trump's term. And on the other hand, if they are extended beyond, for the full decade or longer, the impact on the debt is more like $5 trillion rather than the 3.8 trillion. In fact, I think even that 3.8 was updated to closer to 4. So it is deeply irresponsible. I am a Democrat who cares a lot about the debt and deficits. And I would just remind your viewers that the Affordable Care Act, when it was passed, it included the funds to pay for it. And it actually did pay for itself over time. I think that, fiscal responsibility is a really important thing. And look, I know that we're not going to agree across the aisle necessarily on how we get there. I think it needs to be a balance of spending and revenues. But it was very interesting to me, Brittany, that if you remember, for a couple of days, President Trump said we needed to increase the top marginal rate on the very wealthiest Americans back up to the 39.6% that it was under President Obama. It was decreased under President Trump originally in 2017 to 37%. And so he said, like, for one day, increase that top marginal rate. And I thought that's a really good idea. That makes sense to me. If you could use that and pay down debt or use that to shore up our social safety net programs for those most vulnerable, I think that would be a good thing. But what happened is he got tremendous pushback from donors, from billionaire donors and from hardline conservatives that they weren't going to go for it. They didn't want to see a penny in increased revenues for those at the very top. They only wanted to see increased taxes for those at the very bottom.
And not a single Democrat voted for this bill in the House. And Speaker Mike Johnson, he had a tough task of trying to wrangle his party in. He could only afford 3 defectors. And in the morning that this bill passed, before it did pass, obviously after that overnight marathon debate, it did not look likely that day that they were even going to have a vote and it would pass. But there were a lot of conversations. There was a lot of contention on the deficit as well as SALT. I mean, what did those conversations look like overnight? A, were you surprised it passed? B, and is there any area of agreement you have in this 1,000-page budget with Republicans?
Well, as far as the internal machinations of the Republican conference, I was not. I guess nothing surprises me anymore, Brittany. It wasn't that long ago that we thought there was no way Kevin McCarthy could be ousted, but then he was. We had no idea Mike Johnson would become Speaker, and then he eventually became Speaker, against very significant odds. And, look, we were, I think, surprised when the continuing resolution was passed on a party line vote. We saw that President Trump had met with House Republicans and told them to get it done. And of course, he is now completely in charge of their party to a degree that I don't think we've ever seen a president more, influential or powerful in their own party, where dissent is not appreciated, where people that are insufficiently MAGA are primaried and are voted out of office and face threats back home. I understand why it happened, but I also believe that many of these Republicans do know that this bill was deeply, deeply irresponsible. And, if it moves forward in its current form, it will leave millions and millions of Americans without health insurance, without the food they need. People will die, Brittany, and I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that you'll have nursing homes that'll be forced to close. You'll have hospitals that won't be able to provide the care that people need. You'll have children that will go to school hungry and won't have enough to eat. It's a very, very bleak situation. And, as far as areas of common ground or areas of agreement, interestingly enough, you brought up the state and local tax deduction. And I've been part of a bipartisan working group now for about 5 years on this. Ever since the 2017 tax bill capped state and local tax deduction at $10,000. Historically, we've been able to fully deduct our state and local tax bill off our federal tax bill since the Revenue Act of 1913. That's been the system. I represent a district in California where it has really hurt people, and not just those who are extremely wealthy, but in my district, if you own a home and 62% of my district owns a home, and you pay property taxes on your home. The median housing price is right around $1 million, and so you can do the math. If you're paying that property tax, you're going to hit that $10,000 cap right there. So raising that cap has been really important to me and to a bipartisan group of lawmakers. And we had been meeting like I said, for a number of years, and we've been talking about a cap of around $40,000. And also, though, in fairness, an income limitation of $400,000 or $500,000. So I'm actually encouraged that that's pretty much where they landed. That's where House Republicans landed, with a $40,000 cap and a $500,000 income limit. That would be a big help to a lot of my constituents. What I worry about, though, Brittany, is that will the Senate keep that provision in place? And also, I would not trade the increase in the SALT cap for taking away health care from 14 million Americans, taking away food for millions more, and having a tax increase on those at the very bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. I think that is fundamentally wrong. I think it's immoral, and I'll do whatever I can to fight it.
I want to talk about that a little more because, as you said at the beginning of this conversation, you think aspects of this bill are cruel, and I'm assuming you're talking about cuts to those social programs. So when you're looking at this bill, when you're looking at the tax cuts paired with the changes to social programs, estimates say that this legislation would make the poorest in this country poorer and the richest Americans even richer. And so Medicaid cuts, there's going to be, estimates say, between 8.6 and 14 million Americans who could lose health insurance over the next 10 years. And around 3 million people could lose food assistance with SNAP. I've had plenty of Republicans on my program here. I asked them directly about Medicaid. Each of them have said to me, your coverage will not be lost. We are not touching your Medicaid. We're going after the waste, fraud, and abuse. President Trump himself has said, we're not going to touch your Medicaid. We're going after the waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, what's your reaction to that rhetoric versus what we're seeing coming out of this bill?
Well, the sad reality of this is that they're talking about work requirements, and that sounds good until you unpack what it actually has meant, where it's been implemented in states like Arkansas and Georgia, where you have people who do qualify for Medicaid, but run into all the bureaucracy and the red tape that is put in place by these requirements, and they wind up not getting the care that they need because they don't meet the bureaucratic requirements that are imposed. So I see this really as weaponizing the bureaucracy against people in a manner where they do qualify for the care, they do actually meet the standard of the work requirement, or they meet the exceptions to the work requirement, but because they don't fill the paperwork out promptly or correctly, and because those bureaucratic requirements are onerous, then they're not getting the care that they need. And what you just talked about, the estimate of around 8 million people that'll be booted off of Medicaid, that's not something that Democrats made up or something that was partisan. That was a nonpartisan, independent analysis that was conducted that resulted in that number. And that's a direct result of what we know has happened in states like Arkansas and Georgia, where these bureaucratic hurdles have been imposed. We all want waste, fraud, and abuse out of government. I just think this is not that. This is something fundamentally different. It's a backdoor way to cut millions of people off Medicaid. And then the other thing I should mention is the Affordable Care Act. So you mentioned that overall number of around 14 million. That includes roughly another 5 million people that will lose coverage under the Affordable Care Act because the premium subsidies that were put in place in order to try to incentivize people to get on the ACA exchanges, those are going to be taken away. And so you're going to have another 5 million or so people that are going to be without their Affordable Care Act health care. And so you add it all up, and it's just a really, really, in my view, immoral piece of legislation that will result in a lot more people getting sick. And it seems to be the Republicans' health care plan is don't get sick.
And billions from this legislation are going to be going to border security and enacting President Trump's immigration policies. Speaker Mike Johnson said that this bill would secure the border. What do you make of that funding?
Well, I think that we all want border security, but what we don't want is cruelty. We don't want people who are contributing positively to our society and our economy, who are doing everything the right way towards trying to live their American dream. And just as, my grandparents came to this country for a better opportunity and better, work opportunities, better, safer places to live. I think that we want criminals out of this country, right? We want people who are, in gangs or dealing drugs or involved in any sort of violent criminal activity or other criminal activity. We want them out. But that's far different from what Stephen Miller and people like him are talking about. Stephen Miller is saying that they want a quota of 3,000 deportations a day, and we currently lack the capacity to do anywhere near that. So I worry that the idea here is to go after people who are contributing positively to our economy and our society. It's something we're already seeing in our communities. And for me, the American dream is all about being able to come from other parts of the world and work hard, play by the rules, and do great in the United States. And I particularly worry when we are discouraging the future entrepreneurs, the future scientists and engineers, people that we know are going to lead the way in technology and innovation. I want them to come to the United States and to grow the next great company and to create all those jobs, all that opportunity, and all that innovation here in the United States. And I do worry that we're losing our way.
And as is right now, it doesn't seem like this bill would pass through the Senate. Republican senators have voiced their concerns about the cuts to Medicaid and also how this would just swell up the national debt. But after it passed, Speaker Johnson did say this in an interview, that he wants the Senate to make as few tweaks as possible so it could pass back again through the House. And this, quote, "I have a very delicate balance here, very delicate equilibrium that we've reached over a long period of time, and it's best not to meddle with it too much." What are your thoughts on that, and what do you want to see in the changes in the Senate?
Well, I think he's being honest. He does have a very difficult balance between the Freedom Caucus and others who are more reasonable and understand that this will have a massive negative impact, and actually people will die as a result of losing their health insurance or not having enough to eat. Those are just real world consequences, and I hope that does not happen. The other aspect of this that we haven't discussed is that, as written, this bill will actually increase energy prices, which is exactly the opposite of what President Trump ran on. He ran on trying to lower prices across the board, and that's what we all want to see. But the bill decimates all of the tax credits to a lot of the innovative and clean energy projects and all the associated jobs that go with. And independent estimates now are out there that say that'll increase your energy bills by around $415 per year by the end of the decade. I offered an amendment, I should mention, Brittany, during the whole Rules Committee debate that was what I thought was pretty simple and bipartisan, that said no provision in the bill will increase your energy prices, and that no provision would take effect until it can be demonstrated that it will not increase your energy prices. I thought that was a fairly benign amendment, but my Republican friends would not even hear the amendment, much less allow a vote. And so, at the end of the day, I don't see much good in this bill as it currently stands. So pretty much anything the Senate does, whether with regard to Medicaid cuts or nutrition assistance cuts or the energy tax credit cuts, all of that would be welcome. And I do hope that they don't, to the extent that they cut things, that they don't cut the SALT provisions. Now, I should mention, if there are no changes, then the full deductibility of state and local taxes will return after the end of this calendar year. What I would hate to see is for that $40,000 to go down to $10,000 or $20,000, which is what the majority leader of the Senate, John Thune, has said he wants to do.
And are you hearing anything from Republican senators specifically? Are you and other Democrat members of Congress, are you guys talking to different senators to try to restore funding in any way, trying to lobby more Republican senators who are on the fence about this or who are publicly raising their concerns?
Well, I've spoken with a bunch of my Republican House members, and I'll continue to try to have discussions with them. There are a couple of Republican senators that I do intend to speak with, but I'll leave that, private for now, and I hope that some reason prevails with all of this.
Well, Congressman, as we see this bill make its way through the Senate and beyond, I hope you can come back on and break it down with me again. Thank you so much. You're welcome back anytime. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, Brittany. Good to be with you.